Coming up on this week's episode of TechSNAP, a vulnerability in Wget exposes flaws in many commonly used tools, the major flaw in Drupal that just got a lot worse, and the new protocol that's built into your router that you need to turn off. Then it's a great big batch of your questions, a rockin' roundup, and much, much more on this week's episode of TechSNAP. Hi everyone, and welcome to TechSNAP. This is episode 186 of Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly systems network and administration podcast. We stream this episode live on October 30th, 2014. This episode is brought to you by our three fine sponsors, Ting, DigitalOcean, and iXsystems. I'll tell you more about those great sponsors as this here show goes on. Our live stream, that's powered by the incredible Scale Engine over at scaleengine.com. You've got to go check that out. My name is Chris, and joining us every single week is our host, the admin, the tech, and the teacher, Mr. Alan Jude. Hey there, Alan.
And a Vulcan.
And the Vulcan this week. Yeah.
Yeah.
Happy Halloween, Alan.
Yes, happy Halloween to everybody.
So there's a lot going on. I'm a little jelly because on the pre-show you were showing off your new 10 gigabit dual 10 gigabit port NIC. Which,
well, there's two of them because you need one for the other server as well.
Right, yeah, so I'm double jealous.
And then the 8-port 10 gigabit switch. So yeah, not cheap, but you know, most of the other stuff in that category is quite a bit more expensive, and Amazon kept
bugging you.
Amazon sent me an email saying, hey, you know that switch you keep looking at on Amazon? Mm-hmm. We just took $250 off the price.
Wouldn't you like it now? Yeah. Treat yourself.
You bastards.
Yeah.
Like
Amazon.
I was just talking to a bunch of people about how, you know, getting the most out of 10 gig with, especially with ZFS replication and stuff, and what tuning it's going to take.
I'd like to test that.
We would like to work up a guide for tuning your network to get it just right. Because right now there's a bunch of advice out there about tuning your 10 gig network, but it's mostly just magic numbers. It's like I just kept changing the number, and this one seemed to work best instead of a scientific approach.
Right.
And so we were talking about it, and it's like, well, you know, now I have some gear to play with. Plus,
it could actually go quite well with our first story, because whenever you're downloading something using Wget, it'll download really fast. So Wget is the subject of our first story this week. What the heck's going on, Alan? Yes.
So Wget actually turns out to be vulnerable with a flaw that, in the case that you're connecting to a malicious FTP site, can overwrite any file on your drive and also change permissions and do all kinds of crazy things.
Change permissions and overwrite files. Okay, great.
Yeah. As whatever user you run it as, and, you know, there's that odd time you're downloading like an RPM or some file you need to install, and you're doing that as root. So, yeah, it can get pretty crazy.
Yeah, I guess maybe I have done that a few times.
Yeah, well, especially when you're downloading something to install it, and you need to be root to install it anyway.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, so Wget is a command line downloading client from the GNU project. It's basically found on every flavor of Linux and most other Unix servers and stuff. Even most of my servers have it installed, because when users connect, that's what they expect to use, not fetch, the FreeBSD kind of alternative to that. But Wget's not just really a downloader. Most people that use it don't actually know what it was originally intended to do, which is mirror a website.
Oh, yeah.
So it has the -m switch for mirror, and if you give it an FTP site or a subdirectory on an FTP site, it will download everything in that directory and basically make an exact copy of that FTP site in a directory on your server. And it can also do it with HTTP sites. So you give it a URL, and it'll walk through and download each it'll download the front page and then follow every link that's still on the same site and download that page, and then keep going and going and going, and basically make an HTML copy of the output of the whole website. There are actually some, I remember my business partner, when he worked at the Toronto Star newspaper, as their like 4th level emergency backup, they had a Wget script running in the background, updating the front page and everything linked off the front page to static HTML files every couple of minutes.
Sure.
So if the load ever got so bad that it knocked over all their servers or whatever, they could just go back to serving this plain text version. Now, it would be the HTML, so it would serve everything that was there. So the end users wouldn't know, except for all the dynamic stuff would be static instead. But anyway, so it's actually a mirroring tool, and just downloading with it is kind of almost abuses of it, but it works and it's fine. But if you have Wget before version 1.16, you are vulnerable to CVE 2014 4877, which is a symlink attack. So specifically, a malicious FTP site can change the output of its list command. So in the FTP protocol, list is how you ask for a directory listing, right? You say, show me all the files, that are in this directory. And a malicious server can actually cheat and say, oh, there's this file and it's a symbolic link to here. And then they say, oh, and there's the same file name that's also a directory, which couldn't actually happen on a real system because in your file system, you can't have a directory that's a symbolic link and a directory at the same time.
Right.
But by faking the response to the list command, an FTP server could trick Wget into seeing that. And that's when Wget goes off the rails. So the vulnerability allows the operator of the malicious FTP site to cause you to download files that aren't really there and basically write arbitrarily named files, right? So it traverses into this fake directory that doesn't actually exist and downloads what's in there and puts it wherever the person sets the symbolic link to put them, right? So they can make it download like a symbolic link to over here and then overwrite the files that are there. And even if you have Wget set not to overwrite files, that doesn't count for the way it does symbolic links because it thinks it's a directory and then it's a symbolic link and it gets very confused. So you can actually basically create a symbolic link over top of an existing file on your file system, and Wget will overwrite it with the symbolic link and point it to some other file that you could trick Wget into downloading. So this means that with Wget, you could trick it into downloading an exploit or malware or something to leave in some directory somewhere. But then you could trick it into downloading a new bash profile or an SSH authorized keys file or something, such that, or just creating a cron tab script, such that what it'll run those commands when you log in or when you SSH in, or you'd set it up with a. So I have a link here to the Rapid7, the guys that make Metasploit, and they have with the Metasploit module, what it does is downloads a cron tab file and then tricks the cron tab into running, saying every minute, run this bash reverse shell and then delete this cron tab. So basically, you Wget a directory and all of a sudden somebody has shell access to your server.
Wow.
Yeah. And there's a Metasploit module for this already working, and you can play with it already.
What a mess.
Yeah. So they say if you use a distribution that does not yet ship with a patched version of Wget, you can mitigate the issue by adding the retr-symlinks equals on, or retrieve symlinks, and put that in your etc wgetrc or your homes.wgetrc, and that'll add that switch every time you run the wget command so that you can't get tricked into following the bad symlinks.
Good.
Yeah, so what it'll do is it'll retrieve the symlink, so download it as a symlink instead of following the symlink and going off where it's not supposed to.
Okay.
I think specifically because if you read the tracker results in the Red Hat bug tracker that I linked, apparently CentOS, or like Red Hat 5, so I imagine CentOS 5 as well, are in the support state that this exploit is considered mild enough that they're not going to patch it.
Yeah, severity is rated as medium on their bug.
Yeah, and so, or moderate, isn't it? Anyway, they've decided not to patch it for Red Hat 5. And it kind of makes sense because you would have to be tricked into downloading from a malicious FTP site. So, there's probably not going to be that many of those. So this one's not a huge deal, but it just goes to show how many little bugs there are in the tools we use every day that we didn't even think about.
Yeah, no kidding. That's exactly what it does, Alan. It's kind of spooky.
And the good thing is that people are actually looking for these now and finding them.
Yeah, for sure.
And it just makes me think of all the times that Wget has been mislabeled as a hacker tool, like in the AT&T case, where AT&T posted a bunch of files in a directory on their public website that they didn't actually want to be public, and somebody used Wget to download them all. And thus, Wget was labeled as this tool for hacking the AT&T website when all it was doing was downloading all the files in a directory, which is a perfectly legitimate thing to do. If you don't want people to download the files in a directory, you don't make the directory public.
Right, exactly. And I believe it was also claimed that Edward Snowden used Wget in the collection.
He used Wget to grab a bunch of stuff off internal websites.
Yeah.
And as such, it was again labeled a hacker tool when all it is a downloader.
Yeah. Yeah, it is funny to see the press label Wget as that hacker tool. Yes. Wget was used.
And the press being the press, there was a bunch of proposals for naming this bug, like Wget me a free shell, or what the fuck get, or Wget bleed. Thankfully, there was none of that.
No.
H.D. Moore commented on his Twitter, and he was like, I was just randomly goofing around and found this, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. So if you read the blog post he did over on the Rapid 7 website, he also has a timeline of the vulnerability. You can see that he actually found this back at the end of August and immediately contacted the maintainer of Wget. And a couple days later, the maintainer confirmed the issue and made a patch. And a month later, he sent H.D. Moore sent the advisory to CERT, who assigned the CVE number a week later. And then at the end of October, Red Hat filed their bug and published it. And the next day, Rapid7 put out their advisory and a Metasploit module.
Mm-hmm.
So you can play with that.
Right to the Metasploit module, Alan. Right to the Metasploit. Metasploit's always got the latest stuff.
Yep. Well, H.D. Moore is doing a lot of good work.
Indeed. All right. Any other thoughts on that story?
No. Just patch your Wget.
Yeah, go patch your Wget, everybody. All right. Well, I'll take a minute and mention iXsystems. Go over to iXsystems.com/TechSNAP. That's iXsystems.com/TechSNAP and learn a little bit more about iXsystems. They're a I think I would go beyond to say they might be the biggest name you've never heard of if you're not familiar with them, because they are right. I mean, they sometimes, I think, people haven't heard of them because they do more of a grassroots marketing approach. Because really, iXsystems knows that word of mouth and hearing from people that you can trust is really the way to spread the name, because iXsystems starts from the beginning. They interact with the community, and it goes into that level of care, permeates all of their systems. The white glove support when you order, the pre-purchase support, the post-purchase support. And if you go over to iXsystems.com/TechSNAP, they have the ultimate guide to buying a new server for open source. You can download that and kind of, they'll walk you through some of the rationale and reasons and give you some information you can use to start the dialogue in your company as perhaps looking at iXsystems for some of your hardware. Alan uses them for a lot of the scale engine infrastructure. And
everything new comes from there.
And Alan, I don't know if you noticed, but they were at Ohio Linux Fest, and I had a chance to chat with the folks there. Ken Moore was there, showing off the Lumina desktop.
For them. All the work he does for PCBSD is actually sponsored by iXsystems.
And if you look at the picture he posted, if you look just carefully, if you zoom in right there, past Blaster, you can see my forehead. Right there.
There's one where you can see your whole face.
Yeah, I went and grabbed that one too. That's right there. You can see my whole face, and plus you can see producer Q56's mohawk with his production team shirt.
He's the first one I noticed. And I was like, oh, there's Chris too.
Yeah. Blaster's in the mix, and way back in the crowd, you can see one of Angela's buns. Way back in the crowd. So yeah, we had a good time at Ohio Linux Fest, and it's really neat to see iXsystems there, and eventually the horns came out too. So
well, they were at Linux Fest Northwest as well.
Oh, yeah, and Ohio.
Basically, and Self and every Linux conference that they've heard of, they've been to.
And their talks are always well attended, too. Mm-hmm. They do a really good job of reaching out, because they know that a lot of the people that are working with the equipment and the software are there. And they also know, it's funny, because one of the constant war stories I still hear to this day is that deferral of blame, where you have a hardware OEM, you deploy FreeBSD or you deploy Linux on there, and you get to a certain point and their support just totally falls apart. And there's such a huge gap between the way iX handles a situation like that and your traditional hardware vendor. And I think that's sort of their secret advantage. And as things like high-end storage systems become more and more popular, they're in a better position to capitalize on that.
Yep. Well, I think part of the reason why iX's kind of philosophy for everything seems so different is if you actually understand the history behind the company. Right. Originally, there was BSDI, which was a company that sold BSD as an operating system back when that was a thing, years and years ago. And then at one point, they kind of turned it into they did the whole .com thing. You know, they leveraged the company, and it's going to be a big startup. All this, and of course, it all kind of fell apart because that's how it happens.
Yeah.
And so the core group of people that were actually the Unix people and not the business people kind of split up and did their thing. And ever since then, they've been very specific about what they do, right? They run the company the way they would want to be treated if they were the customer. And, they just want to have a job they enjoy,
and they shifted
make
into
a product
long-term
that their customers are going to like.
Yes, and a long-term sort of investment where they invest at the very ground level. They know it's worth that early work, and it's paying off. Yeah,
and basically they're not doing the typical, startup company or the marketing stuff. And they're just, they're
making great hardware and letting the results speak.
Yes, exactly. Making a product and making the customer happy, because that's what they care about, is being a good company at the end of the day, not about anything else.
And that's why before iXsystems became a sponsor, we actively went after them and asked them to come on to the show. We love you guys. We love what you're doing. We've worked in IT for a long time, and we recognize the difference that iXsystems is, the different approach. The real change there was, like, we finally started going to the conferences and seeing them in person, and like, I was like, no, really, you got to come on and sponsor, and we love them. And so that's why we asked them to become sponsors of the TechSNAP program and BSD Now, because we think it's so great, and we'd like you to check them out. So go over to iXsystems.com/TechSNAP. Check them out. I think you'll be very happy. You'll never switch.
I am.
Yeah, you'll never switch. And we're picky. So
yes, I'm very picky. That's why I used to try to do it myself, because then I would have no one else to blame. But it was really hard, and it turns out that these guys are even better at it than I am.
Yeah, they are. I mean, this is what they do. It's what they do.
Exactly.
So speaking of what things do, Drupal seems to just have problems. That's what it do. What's going on, Alan?
This one was. This story came out about 2 weeks ago, and I wasn't really gonna harp on it too much.
Yeah, I know, right?
There was a lot of other news 2 weeks ago, and it was.
And Drupal has issues from time to time. Big CMSs, this just happens.
Yeah, well, it's definitely got a better track record than WordPress, though, right?
Yeah.
And but then there was a newer announcement today that meant that kind of promoted the story.
Okay.
So there was a flaw disclosed in Drupal about 2 weeks ago, and turns out kind of a bigger deal than they thought. So Drupal 7, which is the new version, includes a new database abstraction API specifically designed to prevent SQL injection attacks.
Right. I remember we covered that we did put it in the roundup.
Okay. Turns out to be vulnerable to a specially crafted SQL injection attack.
Yeah, like the whole thing to protect them is itself susceptible.
Was actually a new vector.
Yeah.
So basically, it allowed someone to, by a SQL injection, inject entire commands of whatever they wanted into the SQL statements.
No good.
So saying, depending on the content of the request, it can lead to privilege escalation, arbitrary PHP execution, or other attacks. So, a user that's not logged into the website could get full access as if they were an administrator and change the content of the website and inject malware or something. Or they can run arbitrary PHP commands and, download a bot or whatever and take over your web hosting account and be able to send spam or whatever else they want to do.
Oy.
Or, basically they can get along around to doing anything.
Yeah.
So, the advice from 2 weeks ago was all users running Drupal 7.x prior to 7.32 need to upgrade immediately. And we have the Drupal security advisory. And interestingly, I grabbed a copy of the actual patch.
Oh, okay.
Which it turns out was a single line.
A one-line patch?
So you can see what they're doing here. There's not much context here, but basically it passes in a list of arguments, and then it does a for each loop over those and get the key value pairs to basically replace, to do the SQL binding, right? Where you have like colon example gets replaced with an example variable. And they did a for each over $data, and then as $I for the index and $value. So basically, it seems they assume that $data will be populated with a regular array, right? Which is, index 0 is this, index 1 is this, right? It's just an array, a big list of things. But in PHP, arrays can also be what are called associative arrays, which are more like a hash, right? It's where you have a key and a value, right? It's key value pair. So instead of 0, blah, 1, blah, 2, blah, you would have like, Chris equals hair and Alan
Absolutely.
Ears. Headphones or whatever.
Ears.
Yeah. And so basically by doing something with the URL or whatever, they could cause the array to have a key instead of an index.
Okay.
And that would cause the SQL injection.
Okay.
So basically by wrapping $data in array underscore values, which basically strips out whatever indexes the array had and makes everything and just returns again a regular non-associative array. So it'll renumber all the indexes or whatever, but it'll just spit out a plain list again, and then it works as intended. So by just adding that little bit of sanitization around that variable that somebody just didn't think of, it solves the problem. Yeah, it's a little crazy. I'm not quite sure how somebody found this in the first place.
Yeah, I suppose, huh?
But the interesting thing here is that it was announced today that the widespread automated attack had been detected against unpatched Drupal instances. Because of the nature of the vulnerability, you don't have to have a user account or something to try to exploit this. And again, because of that, there's actually no trace left behind when a site is compromised.
Oh, no kidding.
Right? Because if you can just run an SQL command that adds some HTML or something to the output,
right,
then there's no way to tell that happened.
I suppose not.
Or, they can basically do whatever they want and there's no record kept of it. So the quote here is, automated attacks began compromising Drupal 7 websites that were not patched or updated to Drupal 7.32 within hours of the announcement of SA-Core 005, the fifth vulnerability of 2014, which is a very small number of vulnerabilities for the year. But Drupal core SQL injection. You should proceed under the assumption that every Drupal 7 website that was compromised, unless updated and patched before October 15th at 11 p.m. UTC, which is 7 hours after they made the announcement, you should assume it's compromised.
Just assume it's compromised.
Yeah. Basically, if you didn't patch within 6 hours, they probably got you with the automated attack. So then on their instructions, they're like, best thing to do is grab a backup of your website and deploy it on a fresh server. And, that's the only way to be 100% sure. You might not have to do that to clean up, but, it's the only way to be 100% sure that the attacker didn't leave anything behind.
Wow. I would, if I ran a Drupal
security
site,
advice, right?
Yeah, but if I ran a Drupal site, I would not want to hear that.
Right. You definitely don't have to do that. But in the end, going through the entire database and every single file and looking for anything that's been modified or out of place will probably take you a lot longer than restoring it back up to a fresh VPS and throwing the old VPS away.
Right.
Or archiving it to allow you to dig through it and decide or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
So yeah, Drupal has a public service announcement, number 3, that goes on to explain the mediation steps. That is the kind of the nice thing about VPSs, especially with DigitalOcean or whatever, is you could just spin up a new one, get it, restore your backup to it, and get back online in a couple of minutes.
Yes.
Whereas with a hardware server, you either have to reformat or whatever, or order a second server, wait a couple of days for it to get set up, then get it all set up right and do it, and then get rid of the old one or whatever, and it gets crazy.
Yeah, very much so. Huge benefit.
Techman in the IRC room points out hourly ZFS snapshots.
Hey-o.
That can be quite helpful because you could just snap backwards, but also there's the ZFS diff command, which can show you what has been changed. It might be easier to just audit or, in the end, just find out what happened. So with the ZFS diff command, you can give it a snapshot before and like your most recent snapshot from a minute ago or whatever, or you just don't include a second one and it does it against live. And you get a list of every file that's been added, removed, modified, or whatever. And by stepping through those, you might actually be able to find out exactly what they did, which you could then decide to try to mitigate around or whatever.
Totally.
But yeah, it's definitely ZFS helps everywhere.
All right, Alan.
And I got a bunch of extra links in here that...
some great threat post coverage.
Yeah. And the last thing was, because it is entirely possible that the attackers dumped the contents of your database if you were running Drupal with this attack, right? Because they could dump it to a file which they could then fetch just over HTTP or whatever. It's probably best to reset all your passwords, right? If you're doing the install or whatever, you should definitely change the administrator password. Now, most people's Drupal sites aren't going to have a lot of users, so resetting the passwords aren't going to be a big deal. But if you run a big member website, you definitely might want to look at resetting everybody's password.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, Alan mentioned, why don't we talk about them? DigitalOcean. Head over to DigitalOcean.com right now. Snap October is your promo code for the month of October, and you still have a couple of days, depending on when you're listening to this, maybe a few hours, to plug that in there and give us credit for the month of October. It'll give you a $10 credit on your DigitalOcean account. And if you try out the $5 rig, you could try that out for 2 months for absolutely free. Let me tell you about DigitalOcean. They're pretty great. And you can go spin up your own cloud server in less than 55 seconds. You'll get 512 megabytes of RAM, a 20 gigabyte SSD, 1 CPU, and a terabyte of your own dedicated transfer. DigitalOcean is a simple cloud hosting provider dedicated to offering the most intuitive and easy way to spin up your own cloud server. And that also means backing them up, recovering, making snapshots before any large changes. And DigitalOcean has an interface that is incredible. It's simple, it's straightforward, yet extremely powerful. And power users can replicate their interface on a much larger scale with DigitalOcean's straightforward API that's meticulously documented. And I think DigitalOcean offers you probably a data center in just about anywhere you'd want it. With New York, San Francisco, Singapore, Amsterdam, and London, there's lots of opportunities for some regional diversity. Go over to DigitalOcean.com right now. Promo code SNAPOctober. That's all one word. It's lowercase, and it'll get you a $10 credit. And you'll start to see that the value you get from DigitalOcean is sort of mind-blowing. First of all, top to bottom SSDs everywhere you go. So you have an SSD-powered infrastructure, which means the throughput you get from those drives is awesome. They're blazing fast machines, tier 1 bandwidth, and it even extends all the way up to that dashboard. Creating virtual machines, managing the virtual machines, managing the DNS, doing the snapshots, the one-click application deployments of things like GitLab or WordPress. All so fast, all so quick. You're not going to waste your time. And getting these things set up is no longer going to be the barrier to getting started. You can boom right through it. Like I used to say to Rikai before DigitalOcean, I would just sort of hum and haw and kind of delay and drag my feet because I got to go create the virtual machine on our server here at the studio. I got to set up the operating system. Got to make sure I've got the right ISO image because it's probably been a different release since the last time I set up a server. Get all that up on the virtualizer, and that's just just little bits and pieces like that. It's 10, 15, 20 minutes of work, so I put it off. But if I go over to DigitalOcean.com, I can get going in under a minute, and I can have a cloud server that I have root access to spun up. And their pricing structures and tiers is so straightforward. You get HTML5 console access. You even get to see the BIOS of the machine boot up. It's super cool. And DigitalOcean's kicking up their tutorial section. They're going to pay up to $200 if you're an expert on a topic and you can write a tutorial. You can work with their editors, and they'll pay you for it because they want to make sure they have some of the best guides on the net so you can take better advantage of DigitalOcean. So head over there right now. Use the promo code SNAPOctober, get a $10 credit, and spin up your own server. I've been using mine for OwnCloud. That's what I sync my phone to. BitTorrent Sync. There's all kinds of possibilities. Matt from the Linux Action Show loves to use it for WordPress. He's got a couple of them spun up, and you can also transfer these. So if you have a client that you need to spin up a WordPress installation for, something like that, get it configured and then move it. It's pretty cool. DigitalOcean.com, SNAPOctober when you check out. And a big, big thank you to DigitalOcean for sponsoring the TechSNAP program.
Yep.
Spinning up them servers, Alan. In fact, I was just thinking about, I have also one that's pretty, Quazzle IRC server, which is pretty handy. I was just thinking about spinning one up for some of the other JV folks.
Yep, Quazzle is nice. Actually, we're using it at Scale Engine now because it makes it easy for even when somebody's on their laptop or whatever and they got to shut down, their client stays on IRC and they get the notification later when I yelled at them to do something.
And I've got it on my, I got it for my Nexus 5 too, which is really neat. Quazzle Droid.
Yes, I'm
quite fun.
hoping to get a Nexus 6 soon and do the same thing.
Whoa, big phone, big phone.
Well, if you're gonna have a phone, when you need it, it's better to have it than not, right?
I guess so. All right, so you know how I feel about home routers and universal plug and play. I'm sure this next story is going to change my mind about all of that, right?
Well, there's this new protocol called NAT-PMP, relatively new anyway. Okay. And the whole point was to make a simpler version of UPnP so that manufacturers would stop screwing it up.
Okay, that I can get on board with so far.
However, HD Moore and the folks over at Rapid7 have their, remember Project Sonar, where they go around scanning the whole internet looking for stuff? Remember they found all those problems with the UPnP devices?
Yes.
Well, they've also identified 1.2 million home routers that are at risk because they improperly implemented NAT-PMP.
Geez. Okay.
So NAT-PMP is a UDP protocol designed in about 2005, and it was standardized in 2013 as RFC 6886. And it replaces part of the UPnP protocol with a much more simple algorithm. Basically, it allows a host to do three things. A host on the internal network, like behind your router, can send a UDP message to the router saying, hey, please open TCP or UDP port number 1234. And on the internet, so that traffic from the internet that comes in on that port will then be forwarded to that computer. Now, the router will either say, yes, okay, I've done that for you, or sorry, that port's already in use, but I've given you this random port instead. And then so that the computer knows what the external port number is going to be. And then the client can then say, please, get rid of this port mapping that I've asked for before. And the third command is, tell me the IP address of the external interface of the router. What's our internet IP address? And that way, if you're a client behind the router and you want to, say, host a game of something on Steam or whatever, your computer can just say, hey, router, I need, this Steam port opened up and forwarded to me. And the router's like, okay. And then the computer's like, all right, what's your IP address? And then I can send out to everybody, hey, you can connect to me. Here's my IP address and the port number. Right? It's quite simple, works quite well. However, it seems some implementations are actually configured incorrectly. So it's not necessarily that they're bad implementations, because most people are actually using Mini UPnP, which is an open source project that does it correctly. However, when it's configured wrong, doesn't help, right? And so the misconfiguration is that they accept requests from both the internal and external interfaces, right? So this NAT-PMP was specifically designed to be run only on the internal interface, right? So computers behind the router can say, please open a port, but computers from the internet shouldn't be able to say anything, right? So the NAT-PMP protocol uses the source IP address of the requesting machine to create the mapping, specifically to help prevent abuse, right? So that if I'm sitting here on the LAN, I can't go to the router, hey, could you open up this port to the internet on host B so my friend can hack into it over the internet? Because that would be bad, right? However, because it's UDP, you can spoof the source address. Because unlike with TCP, you don't have to get a reply with UDP. Right? This is how we got that whole NTP server attack and everything, right?
Yes. Right.
So that's kind of a problem with the protocol, but it shouldn't be a big deal because in most cases, especially with consumer routers, you just automatically trust everything that's on the inside of the LAN, right? So I have the post here from Rapid7, and they've broke down what they found. So there's about 1.2 million internet-exposed devices that they found that had one or more vulnerabilities with their NAT-PMP implementation.
Oy.
So the smallest number had the worst one, which is 2.5% of the 1.2 million, so about, I think, 30,000 or something, are vulnerable to interception of internal NAT traffic.
Oy.
Specifically, an attacker can create a mapping to forward attempts to connect to the router to some external address, right? So, if you try to go to the web interface on the router, it'll secretly be forwarded to the attacker's IP address outside on the internet, where he can then log down your password. And then maybe he can connect to your router and change something. Or maybe even worse, what they could do is, in most cases, the router configures all the clients on the LAN to use the router as its DNS server.
Yeah, right. Pretty common.
Right? And then it runs a caching name server out to real ones from your ISP or whatever.
Yeah.
Well, you could use the NAT-PMP to force all the machines on the LAN, or force the router to forward all DNS requests it gets to my evil DNS server that returns the wrong IP address for your bank or whatever. Which means it's fairly trivial to start a man-in-the-middle type attack because you can misdirect the traffic.
Yes.
Now, turns out there's only like 2.5% of them that are vulnerable to that, so that one's not as popular. The other ones, though, are big numbers. 86% are vulnerable to interception of external traffic. So this allows the attacker to create a mapping on the external interface. So the attacker can say, when someone tries to connect from the internet to your public IP address, forward this port, which they shouldn't be able to do from outside, only from inside.
No kidding.
Right? So, for example, since most routers have the HTTP server disabled on the external interface because you don't want people connecting to that, right? That'd be bad. An attacker could use your router to reflect their website, right? So I could send one of these packets to a misconfigured router and say, hey, map incoming traffic coming to your port 80 to actually go to my web server over here. And now I can give people an address for my website that actually points to your router. And so, especially if I'm hosting malware or something where I'm going to get shut down,
sure,
they don't get my actual server. I can just keep moving around between all these home people's routers, and even if they go and check all their computers aren't compromised, right? It's just this mapping.
Yeah.
So that it basically kind of almost lets you do kind of like those onion secret addresses or whatever they're called for the Tor network, right? Where you have a service address where someone's not supposed to be able to figure out where their actual web server is. Mm-hmm. Except for you can do that by just hiding on 1,000 cable machines. Mm-hmm. I'm surprised, the Pirate Bay isn't using something like this.
Or I wonder if somebody is. Maybe they are.
88% are vulnerable to access to internal NAT client services. So specifically because NAT-PMP is over UDP, it's possible to do a spoofed packet. So from outside on the internet, I could send a packet to the router claiming to be from 192.168.0.100, saying, hey, could you open up port, what's the Windows one, 139?
Yeah,
for
139.
so that I can connect in and get access to your file shares or whatever. Obviously bad, but it's what can happen when the daemon's misconfigured to accept packets on the external interface as well. Now, this one's slightly mitigated by the fact that ISPs are finally starting to try to avoid allowing spoof packets to leave their network, but there's still a lot of places that allow it, as we saw with the NTP attacks. Now, some of them tightened up after that, but a lot of them didn't. And so, it's still very possible to send spoof packets like this. 88% are vulnerable to a denial of service attack. Now, this isn't like the ones you see that shut down a website or something. This isn't bulk traffic. This is actually a denial of service. So specifically, you can create a mapping on the router to map the NAT-PMP service off to some other IP address. So now, all the port forwarding requests from inside your LAN will actually get forwarded off somewhere else and effectively not work. So now you've disabled the NAT-PMP feature on the router.
Yeah.
Almost seems like someone might want to go do that one on purpose.
Yeah, no, that's what I was thinking. Just break it.
Because that would stop the router from being vulnerable, hopefully, as well.
Yeah, exactly.
And then they found 100% of the 1.2 million devices were vulnerable to information disclosure, where they exposed more data about the NAT-PMP implementation and device than they should have. And that's basically how they started. Now, they also broke down a bunch of they found, stats on how many people have an external IP address on their router that's carrier-grade NAT or just some weird internal address instead of a real IP, and a lot of other things like that. But in one of those, they also found some interesting ones. 7,400 devices from a certain ISP in Israel responded to the unwarranted UDP request of any sort. So if you send any UDP packet to them at all, they send back an HTTP response from Nginx.
What? Any UDP packet?
Access.
Any UDP packet?
So certain UDP packets on certain ports anyway cause you to get back a response saying, hey, you're not authorized.
Okay.
So meaning that there's some certain command you could send over UDP that would get some actual response.
You might get authorized back.
Well, you might get whatever content. There. So something definitely weird is going on with those 7,400 devices.
That's not good.
Yep. But because of the nature of Project Sonar and how widespread this vulnerability is and stuff, they haven't been able to figure out which brands or models of devices are actually the ones that are vulnerable. Because all they see are random devices on the internet. They can't actually seem to figure out which ones are which brands. Although, because they can cause your attempt to connect to the router to be forwarded to them, but they can't cause them to be able to connect to the admin interface on the router. So that they don't get because oftentimes the login screen has the brand name and model number where they would be able.
So they they believe they know of more than 1.2 million vulnerable devices.
Yes, but they haven't been able to figure out which brands and models that actually is.
Yeah.
So they have a Metasploit module for testing it. So it might actually be helpful if people have some routers which they know what model they are or whatever, and try the Metasploit against them from outside and see if they can actually start making a catalog of what's vulnerable and what's not.
That's a great idea. That is a great idea. Just crowdsource it over time. And you'll still miss some, but at least you'll get an idea of which ones are.
Well, yeah, because especially in one of the stats they broke down by country, and it looks like a lot of these are in, only 64,000 of them are in the U.S.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing it's, some brand that targets Europe and Eastern Europe mostly.
pfSense, pfSense, pfSense.
Yeah, basically.
Yes. All right, I'll tell you about something else.
You can be sure that the mini UPnP on pfSense is not misconfigured.
pfSense,
and even if it was, there's the config file. You can edit it.
It makes sense to use pfSense, and you know what else makes sense?
How's that not there?
Ting makes sense because Ting's already got it. Ting makes sense. See, Ting already took it. Otherwise, pfSense could have it, but Ting's got it now.
But pfSense has the word sense in it, so it makes it so much better. I
know. But I think Ting sprung early, and you know how that goes. Once somebody claims it, you can't, and nobody else can ever use it ever.
For sure.
No, I kid. TechSNAP.ting.com. Go there right now, won't you, and support the TechSNAP show. TechSNAP.ting.com will also give you a $25 credit off of your first Ting device. If you've got a Ting-compatible device, well, that's even better. They'll give you $25 of service credit, and if you're like me, that's what I did. I brought an Evo 4G over, and it lasted me more than 2 months. Ting has no contracts, therefore no early termination fee, and you only pay for your usage. I know, it's crazy, right? Ting takes your minutes, your messages, and your megabytes. They add them up. Whatever your usage is what you pay. You don't prepay into some allotted amount of minutes that you may or may not use, that you overbuy, so that way you don't get penalized, but then you never fully take advantage of. Or when you do go over, you're suddenly slapped with a fee that's almost as much as another bill. It's ridiculous. So the way Ting does it, and this is why it makes sense, it's a flat $6 for the line. So you can have as many lines as you want. It's $6. Then it's just your usage. They bill that, and that's all you pay. If you ever get stuck, you can call them, 1-855-TING-FTW, anytime between 8 a.m. or 8 p.m., and a real human being answers the phone. You get to speak to a human, and they're empowered to help you. They've also got an incredible online dashboard that you can use to manage your accounts, deactivate devices when you're not using them, transfer devices, name them, set alerts, set thresholds. Just check on individual usage. And right now is a great time to head over to TechSNAP.ting.com, because Ting is moving to a new warehouse, and they're doing their final warehouse sale, and this is the big one. They've got the HTC One on sale, the Moto X Black on sale, LG Optimus on sale. They have some feature phones on sale, and you get also every phone. Not only do you get the discount of the phone, but you also get a $20 Ting credit. So if you go to TechSNAP.ting.com, you're going to get our discount plus their credit discount. I talked to somebody at Ohio Linux Fest who went ahead and took advantage of that, and they've got like their next 3 months of Ting paid for. It's awesome. You could also get the HTC Evo if you want the old school like I brought over. This is the LTE edition. You can get that for a ridiculously great price. The LTE Evo 4G is just, it's an insane price right now. This is the sale to go for. This warehouse sale, if you've been thinking about getting an HTC One with those incredible front-facing speakers, now you can get it from Ting for a great discount and $20 in Ting credit. TechSNAP.ting.com. Go there. Let them know you appreciate them supporting the TechSNAP show by visiting that. And while you're there, try out that savings calculator. How much would you save? Click that button. Go there. Plug in your existing usage. Not what you pay for, but how much you actually end up using. And then see how much you'd save over a 2-year period. If you're like me, it's over $2,000. It's pretty awesome. TechSNAP.ting.com. And a really big thank you to Ting for sponsoring the TechSNAP program. I'm almost at my 2-year mark with Ting. I've never been happier. It just gets better and better. Like, they just recently upgraded the dashboard. It's so cool. The Nexus 5 with Android L is going to be one of the best Android phones on the market. I'm really excited about that too. It's looking real good, Alan. It's looking real good. All right, sir, is there anything else we want to cover in the news segment before we run on to the feedback?
Nope.
You know, I noticed that their BSD Now just came out this morning.
Nice.
Episode 61, IPsecCon D. What is that? IPsecCon D. What is that?
Second wind, isn't it?
Oh, I see. IP second wind.
So IPsec gets second wind.
Aha. I was thinking like it's an IPsec daemon. Like, what the? I gotcha.
No, it's revamping IPsec with newer crypto algorithms to make it fast. Specifically, if you have, say, 10 gigabit networking, doing IPsec was, you couldn't actually manage to get all 10 gigabits because it was too CPU intensive. But with the new code Jean-Marc put in, it now uses the AES-NI instructions on your Intel and so on, and some algorithms that are a little lighter so that you can encrypt that traffic without using up all your CPU.
Cool, Alan. Episode 61, and I'll give a plug for episode 83 of Tech Talk Today all week. We've been covering the NFC mobile payments war and the currency and all of that as it's been developing. And in 83, we kind of just came to a conclusion on our coverage for the week. Plus, we covered the new Microsoft band. Tech Talk Today, episode 83, came out this morning. 2 great shows that came out this morning. Lots going on over at Jupiter Broadcasting. Check it out. And also, you can check out Linux Unplugged and Linux Action Show from this past week for our Ohio Linux Fest coverage and Seagull Fest coverage. So lots of Fest stuff going on. And Alan is leaving a little bit after today's episode, or like tomorrow or the next day.
Early-ish, yep.
Flying out to go to meet BSD. So it's just all kinds of crazy stuff going on. We'll have content from that as well. But Alan, with the news all done, that means it's time for the TechSNAP feedback. Thanks for sending your emails to TechSNAP at jupiterbroadcasting.com, or pop in that contact link at the top of the Jupiter Broadcasting website, or even better, starting a thread in our subreddit over at techsnap.reddit.com. We're going to start out our feedback segment with a sponsored email from duckduckhack.com. Now, you're familiar with DuckDuckGo, you know, the privacy-focused search engine that doesn't track you. I've got DuckDuckGo set up on my iPhone in the default search, and on my Nexus 5, I've got the DuckDuckGo widget on my home screen. It makes it really easy, but DuckDuckGo wanted me to talk to you about DuckDuckHack. Go to duckduckhack.com right now. It's DuckDuckGo's their open source instant answer platform, and anyone can go there, submit a pull request, and make DuckDuckGo's search more relevant. Now, this is particularly, they want to reach out to the TechSNAP audience. That's why we have it in the feedback segment here, because they know our community is full of sysadmins, networking folks, server guys and gals, developers, et cetera, that there's probably a lot of topics out there where you could go and help someone that's searching for those things get more relevant information. I got a couple of examples. Like I know, for example, Alan isn't a big Reddit fan, but sometimes there's useful information. Not that you mind it, but, you know, if you just need something really quick, this is kind of a neat option. You can go to duckduckgo.com, you put Reddit in the search box, and then space the command, or the term, I should say, you want to look for. In this case, baking. But it could be, you know, network card or anything like that. And then DuckDuckGo will do a search of Reddit for you and display the results. You never have to go there. Just right there. Boom.
Cool.
Another example.
Specifically, I was thinking lots of TechSNAP audience people will have used DuckDuckGo to look up how to do X or Y.
Yeah.
And had to dig through a bunch of results to find the answer. And then they could contribute back an instant answer so that the next person that searches for that exact same thing can find the answer right away instead of having to go through a bunch of different sites.
And another example for our audience that could be really relevant today, you can search right into the Stack Overflow question and answers. So if you've got something about Apache or an Nginx, like in this example here, right, you can pull right out of the Stack Overflow Q&A directories and get people's discussions right there. That's really helpful. Or another one, like you could just type this right into the DuckDuckGo search, alternative to Notepad. And then boom, right up there they'll pop up Notepad++, Sublime Text, Vim, Gedit, Notepad 2, TextMate. All these options just right there, and you can click them and get more information about them. These are submissions that the community has put through the DuckDuckHack open answer platform. And what's so great about this is you can go to duckduckhack.com right now, and you can make DuckDuckGo's search even better, even more relevant for these kinds of things. And this is what I think is truly exciting. Plus, not only that, but you're bringing more privacy and open source to web search, which is kind of a big deal for me too. So here's how you get started. It's available to anyone. Go to duckduckhack.com. That's duckduckhack.com. Submit your pull request. They'll work with you. There's also other issues and current plugins that people are working on that maybe you could help somebody with. They have a great page up on GitHub with discussion threads on that. So if you want to get involved, that's also available. And if you've got an idea, they'd love to hear from you. So go to duckduckhack.com and help them out. And thanks to DuckDuckGo and DuckDuckHack for their interest in reaching out to the TechSNAP audience. I think it's a perfect fit. I think it's a really exciting initiative too. And, you know, it might change up the search engine monopoly a little bit. Might break things up a little. That's pretty exciting too.
Monocultures are bad.
Yeah, we talk about that a lot in security, but it's in all industries. So we had a follow-up from Caustic, and he wanted to talk about switching from Puppet to SaltStack. He says, hey, Alan and Chris, on the last episode, Weaponized PowerPoint, Jeremy wrote in asking about a recommended centralized configuration management system. I agree with what Alan said about sticking with what works, but I still thought I'd chime in about why I switched from Puppet to SaltStack. One of the biggest reasons is it appeared to me that it was a framework written first as a way to execute commands in parallel across your servers, and then as a configuration management framework. This provides the advantage of being able to easily get feedback or investigate issues with your deployment in real time. I understand that Puppet's M Collective allows you to do this, but it doesn't feel nearly as fast or flexible as Salt's remote execution modules. The other reason is I found that Puppet's custom declarative language very difficult and inflexible when trying to do simple things like grant multiple permissions. A last comment, Alan said that one of the reasons he wasn't keen on switching was because he suspects that it would be difficult to do so with some of the things he does in Puppet and other frameworks, like writing DNS zone files, for example. It turns out...
Because I'm not just writing a DNS zone file based on a template or something. I'm generating a giant global server load balancer multi-sectional config based on huge, horrible, abusive Puppet.
Yeah, he included a script for you to look at, but I wanted to... Benny kind of wrote in, and I just thought Benny kind of had a follow-up to that, too. He says, hey, guys, Benny from Israel here. As always, thanks for the awesome show. I'd like to quickly comment on your patch management topic. I've played with the three systems above, and I must say that it seems to me that Salt is miles ahead. He's saying versus Ansible or Puppet. He says Salt is miles ahead. It's very intuitive, as always with Python, yet very powerful. I'd suggest any newcomer to choose it over the others. Thanks for the great show. Benny.
Yes. Now, if I was starting now, I probably would start with Salt. But back then, Salt hadn't officially supported FreeBSD yet. They came out like 2 months after I started with their FreeBSD support. And basically, the reason I picked Puppet is because someone else had written a tutorial on using it with FreeBSD and making it work.
Right.
And yeah, I'm kind of locked in now because, yeah, his example on a zone file with a loop, that's not bad, but you don't understand the complexity of what I was doing.
Right, yeah.
Basically, we have regions and then servers and then services, and then you're multiplying them all together and making the config come out in the right order every time. It's mind-boggling.
But definitely
it took days to write.
Definitely some pro Salt emails, which is good to hear.
Yes,
That's exactly what we wanted, so thank you, everybody.
Exactly. I would probably recommend people look at Salt instead of Puppet, especially after I heard some interesting stories from my friend Dylan trying to he needed to get the results of the git describe command and then use that in a template, and Puppet just didn't want to do it.
That's rough. Yeah. All right, let's see if we can help Danimal. He writes in what he says for us fine gentlemen. This is the best IT podcast on the net. Can't disagree there. But he wants to know, can you spoof a public source IP address across the whole internet? For example, if I have, say, an internet-facing server with a public IP on its NIC card, I always love that, and I specify in the firewall rules of my server that only one is a specific public IP, only one specific IP that's public can connect to it. Say it's a public IP on a different ISP across the country. Then is it possible for a hacker to spoof that one IP that I said was allowed and thereby gain access to the server? Let's say there's a server in LA. The good user is in New York, and the hacker is in Seattle. All on different ISPs. I'm specifically curious if an ISP enforces rules to customers like, we only have allocated you an IP in this range, so there's no way a packet with a source IP of a different range would ever come from that ISP. Is that a thing they do? Hope this makes sense, and thanks. Forgive me if you've covered this on the show before.
This really fits in with the topic we talked about a little earlier in the show. So there's a couple things. First, he has to vote a policy at the ISPs. There's a thing called BCP 32, 37? I forget. But it's best common practices, and it's specifically that ISPs should drop packets leaving their network from an address that isn't inside their network, specifically like he's describing. However, most places don't do that. Some places do, but most don't. Partly because what their block of IPs that are inside their network changes quite a bit, especially at a larger ISP where you're doing transiting and peering and stuff. You will have customers of yours that are connecting to you that then have their own IP space that you don't control, and when they add that, you don't want it to not work, and it gets complicated. But so yes, it's possible to spoof the source IP address because you could just write the wrong IP address and send the packet. The reason it won't work for a regular TCP connection, like to connect to a website, is that when your server, the one that's all firewalled, receives that packet saying, hey, I'd like to open a connection with you. Remember, TCP has that three-way handshake where it goes back and forth and back and forth. So it sends the SYN packet saying, hey, I'd like to open a connection. And then your server sends back a response with a random number or whatever to then be used to get back another response to actually set up the connection. And because the address is fake, the attacker never gets that first response packet. And then the server that does, the place with the IP address that is allowed to connect, is like, I didn't ask for that, and just ignores it. And so they can't make a TCP connection because they can't receive the response sent to the spoof packet. However, UDP doesn't require responses. You can send a packet, and it's just received by the other side.
Right.
And they just process it, and they don't usually send a response. Or if they do, you don't have to receive it or whatever. So with TCP, because you have to receive the sequence number and so on to make the connection, and you can't do a spoof one, but with UDP you can. So especially if you're have some service that uses UDP, you have to watch out a lot more. And that's how those NTP attacks worked, right? The bad guy would send a request to the NTP server saying, hey, give me all this giant amount of data.
Right.
Oh, right. I'm actually this IP address over here. So when the NTP server got the spoofed packet from person A, it would then send the response to who person A was pretending to be, which was actually person B. And if you got a lot of people doing that, person B's connection would get flooded, and that was the denial of service attack. So yes, it is possible to spoof a source address across the internet. It wouldn't be possible if every ISP filtered their outbound traffic and prevented spoofed IPs from getting out, but they don't. Luckily, it doesn't work for TCP unless you're somehow doing a man in the middle or something. In that case, then you can, you could spoof. The other way to do the spoofing requires you be basically a trusted ISP almost, or at least have BGP, where you can you can add a new entry to the global routing table saying, hey, I am this block. I'm authoritative for this block of IP addresses.
You'd have to be in a pretty special position to do that, though.
Not very special, but
no, you don't think so?
Well, you'd have to have a BGP connection from somewhere.
How would you get
anybody
that, though?
who is with a fiber line like I have at my house.
Well, okay, that's pretty special, Alan.
Right, but it, you don't quite have to be that special. But basically any company that's, if you have your own IP addresses and don't get them from your ISP, you have the BGP connection.
Okay.
And basically you could say, route all connections to these IP addresses to me. Now, when there's two routes for those, then the real one and your fake one, everybody who's closer to you than the real one will send their traffic to you, right? And that's actually how Anycast works, right? Google purposely does this with their DNS servers,
right?
The 8.8.8.8.
Yeah.
They actually broadcast that IP address from locations all over the globe,
right? And
that way you always go to the closest one. But remember we talked 6 months ago about some place in like Brazil or something pretending to be a U.S. bank and getting all their traffic.
Yes.
Or traffic getting bounced around all over the place because of it. What was it? Just like 3 or 4 weeks ago, there was a place that accidentally broadcasted the routing table from every one of their ISPs out to the other ISP and tried to route the entire internet through their connection by accident. So if you're in that position, you can, but somebody will notice pretty quickly and they will disconnect your session and take all your connection down until you fix it.
That's true. Yeah. Okay. Next email comes in from Tom, and he's going to impart a little wisdom. He says, from time to time, you get questions about how to host your own email server, like at a home lab. The biggest issue around this is always sending emails from a residential IP address, and I thought I'd share my solution. I use Amazon Secure Email Service, the SES. It only costs 10 cents per 1,000 emails plus any data transfers. So if you have a lot of attachments, that could add up. I know there are free solutions as well as DIY solutions, but since Amazon is so widely trusted by anti-spam applications, I stay off blacklists and rarely end up in anyone's spam filter. Hope this helps.
Yep. The other easy one is what's called smart hosting. You can configure this in most of your mail server stuff that are already be on your machine, if you're doing a mail server or whatever. And for example, you can give it the username and password for a Gmail account you set up, and it will basically send it it'll go to Google, log in with the username and password for this Gmail account, and send it through Google.
All right.
And then it, as far as spam filters are concerned, it looks like you sent it from Thunderbird or whatever on your desktop through your Google account. But the problem with that is you're actually putting the username and password for that Google account in your config file.
If it's for one account, it might be fine, though.
Right. Well, you do it for one account for all email leaving that machine. And so you could make it a separate Gmail account that's only for that. Yeah. And so it doesn't matter that somebody steals the password or whatever. That's an easier solution than having to pay Amazon. But, there are remailers like the Amazon thing there.
Yeah, the Amazon one's a good idea.
Like the Amazon one, you have to use an API to send the email, though. It's not actually just hooking it up to your mail server.
It's not just SMTP or whatever?
I don't actually know.
Like, that would be so Amazon, actually, now I think about it.
Well, yeah, because, you don't FTP into your S3.
Right, exactly.
API.
Yeah.
I don't actually know how it works. I know Colin looked into it once for TarSnap, but I forget what he said about it. I think there was a reason he wasn't using it, but I don't remember what it was.
Might be worth a look for some of you.
But it's definitely worth a look if for some reason you need to send email from your house.
All right, so Kizzy is having network bandwidth issues as of late. It works fine most of the time until I start to do a large degree of bandwidth-intensive things like large file transfers and running BitTorrent sync. I started noticing it when I was doing these large transfers. It would seem to lose internet connectivity altogether. Lots of packet loss and timeouts. Plex streaming would stutter over the LAN and act like it was buffering constantly. I'm wondering if it's possible that I'm maxing out the throughput bandwidth of my network, but it seems like I should be able to handle these things fine for the most part. The network in question is set up with mostly wired and 2 wireless access points at both ends of the house. The Wi-Fi are on opposite ends of their channels, like 1 and 11. I'm not sure if that's a good practice or not, since I don't have a lot of knowledge on Wi-Fi. But he goes on to say that, a lot of the hardcore stuff is happening over the wired connection. He wants to know if there's any tools we'd recommend for troubleshooting this sort of thing. He's like, should I be looking into bandwidth and throughput? Maybe Wi-Fi dead zones and signals could be causing issues for the Wi-Fi devices. And I think he generally wants to figure out if he is actually maxing out the capacity of his network. Now, I'm looking through here, and I'm not seeing the details on his switch. So that's one piece he's leaving out. Right,
but in particular, he mentions like packet loss, but didn't mention how he measured that or between what and what.
Right. So maybe that's where we should start.
Yeah, like a specific, if he hadn't mentioned that his Plex server was stuttering over the LAN, like, yes, your internet connection will have trouble, especially if you try to upload your maximum amount of upload, because it means when you're trying to download stuff, you can't send back the acknowledgement packets and it causes all kinds of mess. You can really definitely choke your internet connection really badly by trying to upload more than your maximum upload.
And especially if you have like your ISP's Soho router, they really suck at that.
Yes, and a lot of those Soho routers, especially when they're routing traffic, they have very tiny CPUs. Yep. So some of them will even have like a gigabit interface or whatever, but they can only pass like 150 megabits of traffic before they fall over.
And that happens to right here at the Jupiter Broadcasting Studios when Rikai uploads a video for publishing. That little router that's all that little CPU can handle doing.
And you need a PFSense.
Yeah, well, we're going to, for sure. Yes. So what do you think he should do to test maybe throughput between devices?
Well, for throughput just between 2 devices on a quiet network or whatever, I use iPerf.
Yeah.
There is a version for Windows, so you can do that as well, and it'll be in like every Linux package repo and the FreeBSD repo and so on. And so that's how I tested it, even on my LAN. I fired up on my Windows machine here, and then the copy on the server in basement, and I just be like, all right, oh look, nice Intel NICs, I can get 950 megabits in either direction. But this one with the Realtek NIC only tops out at like 640 because it's a PCI instead of PCI Express, and so on and so on. And it also has a UDP mode, which is easier for detecting packet loss or out of order packets and things like that. For the packet loss, if you're just running a ping between 2 hosts and then start up a big file transfer or something and see what happens there.
You could always use a little Wireshark to see if you've seen a lot of retransmission packets too.
There's also MTR, and there's a Windows version, WinMTR.
Yeah.
And basically, this is like a trace route, except for it runs continuously. So you get basically the trace route results, but then it's basically pinging every host the whole time as well. So then when you get packet loss, you can basically see where it happens. And so if you're going out to the internet, we covered this, there was a Nanog presentation we talked about, I don't know, a couple of months ago. But basically, if you see packet loss at just one host in the middle and nothing before, nothing after it, that's probably just the router ignoring the pings because its CPU is busy. But if you see somewhere all of a sudden the packet loss percentage starts and then every host after that has that percentage or worse, then that means that that host is probably where your problem is. Now, on your LAN, there's not going to be any hops, so you're not really going to notice anything there. But
I wonder, too, he mentions he notices when he fires up BitTorrent Sync and is doing large transfers. I wonder if the BitTorrent Sync server and the Plex server are the same server, and I wonder if they're running from like a single spinning hard drive, and maybe they're having disk I/O.
Cause problems.
Yeah.
That would definitely cause you stuttering on your Plex and so on. The other thing to consider there is just, BitTorrent Sync lets you set like a maximum upload speed and so on, right?
You could try dialing that down a bit and see if it helps things.
Well, the other one I think is he might have the misconception of megabits versus megabytes. Specifically, he mentions, I seem to remember Wi-Fi being rated for 300 megabytes per second.
Right.
No,
it's megabits.
Even gigabit LAN isn't that fast.
Yeah.
And even 300 megabits is N with only one device on the network.
Yeah. And if you got a good 5 gigahertz connection.
Specifically, he mentions mix mode B, and that will automatically limit you to 54 megabits.
Yeah, and it's going to keep you on 2.4 gigahertz too.
Yeah, and if you, G's what? How fast
54?
is G?
54?
Is it 54?
Yeah.
Or B is 54?
No, I think B is 11. Yeah.
Yeah. So your Wi-Fi is definitely, Wi-Fi is crap. There's just nothing you can do about that.
Yeah.
At one point, I actually went to having one BG access point and a separate N access point, so my N devices would be faster. So the Wi-Fi the difference, the thing to consider with Wi-Fi is whatever speed they're telling you, like that 54 megabits or whatever, or 300 megabits for N, that's divided by every client that's using it. So if there are 10 people connected, that's 30 megabits each.
Yeah.
And so on.
Yeah.
Plus, if the signal strength is weak, what it'll do is with wireless, you have these symbols. So instead of transmitting the raw byte over the Wi-Fi, you actually convert that byte into a symbol that's slightly larger. So that if one of the bytes gets garbled over the air because of interference, it'll still be able to tell, oh, that was actually this byte. And the worse the signal strength is, the bigger the symbols get. So it takes more bandwidth to transmit the same amount of data. So the weaker your connection is, the lower the speed's going to get.
That's
so you're never going to get 300 megabits a second over your Wi-Fi, even if it's N and there's no, and it's inside a Faraday cage. So yeah, your wireless is definitely going to be slow always. That's just wireless. Now your LAN shouldn't be though. So I would definitely look at just do an iPerf between two hosts that are on the switch or whatever, and make sure you're getting the speed you expect. And
also check your disk I/O stats when you're doing all of these things, and see if maybe there's an internal bottleneck. Yeah,
if you're running BitTorrent sync, especially with a lot of files and it's reading and writing all over the place, then that can cause your Plex to stutter if it's based on the disk as well.
Yeah, it could be that the FFmpeg decoder for Plex can't read from the files fast enough, or it can't get the data to the network card fast enough because it's waiting on the disk. So there's a lot of things that could be happening.
Like I wonder if he's using a FreeNAS. If he is, then ZFS will be better than some other file systems because it'll read ahead into the RAM some of the video and then go do the BitTorrent sync and then back and forth and try to keep them both from starving. Although more RAM will let it do more of that. But then again, in the end, it can only read from the disk so fast, so you need more spindles. Right? And that's why there's that article over at iX about spindles.
That's right. Let's bring it all together.
But yeah, he keeps mentioning Wi-Fi dead zones and stuff, and it's like, well, yes, your Wi-Fi is never going to be fast.
Yeah.
And it's going to have packet loss because, microwaves and stuff.
Yep. And neighbors. That's the big one in my area. Lots of Wi-Fi access points, Alan. It's incredible. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 Wi-Fi access points in range just of the laptop that I have here on this table.
Yep.
It's nuts. If you'd like to get a hold of the TechSNAP program, go over to jupiterbroadcasting.com, click the contact link, and choose TechSNAP from the drop-down. Or maybe get some of our experts from the community to chime in as well, which also helps if you need something really soon. TechSNAP.reddit.com. That's the community forum and thread over at Reddit to submit those questions. Or you can just email us directly, techsnap@jupiterbroadcasting.com. We take them that way, too.
Did you see the story I added at the end of the roundup, or feedback?
Oh, no, I don't think I did. Did you add something new?
I added an extra story.
Oh, well, let's go grab that.
And pop that up quick.
I will update my thingy. What's this about? What's this shenanigans
This is what
here?
happened to me yesterday.
Oh, woes with tar, huh?
Yes. So yesterday we noticed that our servers have stopped getting their new config files after yesterday, and it was like, why? What's going on here?
Yeah, right.
So I cleaned this up a little bit to make the example better, but basically on our control server we run this tar command, right, which says create a gzip tar and output it to standard output, and read everything from this config directory, and it has a wildcard, right? So basically it says put all the files into this tar file, and then pipe it into SSH, where then we run tar on the other side and extract it. Specifically because we're dealing with a large number of small files, if we use just SCP to copy the whole directory, it would take a long time. Whereas creating a tar of all those small files, then saying only that compressed data over SSH, and then extracting it on the other side, it's much faster.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right, because you're not having to do each file separately.
Each individual one.
But because in the command line there we have // it basically, your shell replaces that with a list of all the files, a space-separated list of all the different directories that match that pattern, which worked fine for us for years now, until the other day when Stefan accidentally created a directory with kind of a strange name. Because of a bad copy-paste in his Mac terminal, he actually pasted, instead of the person's username that he was creating the account for, he pasted his shell prompt, which is $4.1 $.
Right.
And so now, if you look at what happens when I went to investigate why the configs weren't copying, I saw tar outputting this error saying, argument to -b is out of range between 1 and 8,192, which is 8 times 1024. And I was like, but we're not providing a -b flag anywhere near.
Right, but
What's
it's
happening?
taking that as a -b flag,
right,
isn't it?
So when you put that // in the command, your shell is actually expanding that. So you'd actually get, the tar command, then user1-site, user2-site, and then that bash-site. And now when tar runs, it reads that -bash as command line flags, -b, -a, -s, and -h.
Right, of course.
And it's like, blur, what are you doing? This doesn't make any sense. It's like, that's not a valid block size.
Man, that is just one little paste gone wrong, isn't it? That's funny.
Yeah. Well, it just had this unintended consequence because technically there's a bug in my shell script, or almost actually a command flag injection vulnerability in my shell script. Right? If somebody else could control what the names of those things were, they could have injected something else, like
right,
and caused all kinds of tar to do weird things. Right? They could have overrode, I think, the -f and made tar overwrite some file with the tar file or something, and lots of other different things. So the get ops, which is the standard way of parsing those flags so that everybody didn't have to write their own every time they wanted to write a C program, and similar systems have support for a special flag, just -- by itself with no other arguments. And what that means is everything after that is treated as regular user input and not as special flags like -b.
Yeah.
Right? So by changing that command to just have that -- before the //, it means that no matter what shows up in that star replacement in the shell, it'll be ignored and treated as the literal file name and not as something special.
Right. That's handy.
Now, this comes in handy again because then what I wanted to do was delete that badly named file. Well, if you try to use RM on a file called minus something,
it's going to think again,
work.
Same thing, yeah.
Exactly. So that's where you do RM -- the directory, or RM -r in this case because it was directory. So RM -r space -- space the file name, and now it'll remove it. And it's the same reason why you might want to do the same thing in any of your shell scripts, because otherwise someone could name a file, -f space / or something.
Yeah.
And cause weird things to happen.
Yeah, really weird.
Yeah. And just a tip that I've been using a lot, there's a program called Shell Check, which you can either do online on their website or download the app off GitHub or whatever. And it's kind of like a static analyzer, although technically abuses the term. But basically, you give it a shell script and it analyzes and finds stuff like this.
I like this. I'm bookmarking this out.
It nags you about using cat when you didn't need to, and a bunch of things like that.
Huh.
But yeah, it'll catch all the stuff like this and be like, hey, you might want to consider, what if this variable expands to something like this, or you need more quotes around that, or you put quotes around that, but it's not going to do what you want now, and a bunch of things like that. It's very handy.
And if you had any trouble following along, don't worry. Alan put it all in the show notes, linked right there, and it's also been in the video version if you've been watching that. That's a good tip, Alan. Thank you very much.
Well, it happened to me, so I figured I'd better share.
Could happen to somebody else, too. Very good.
Well, yeah, because I've seen people have trouble with, what do you do when you have a file with a weird character in it and it keeps getting interpreted, and that's what the little -- thing is for.
All right, so send us in your emails. We'll answer them on a future episode of the TechSNAP show, TechSNAP@JupiterBroadcasting.com. And with the emails all done, it means it's time for the TechSNAP Roundup. Welcome to the TechSNAP Roundup. Yeah, that's what that crazy music means. Now, the Roundup are stories that just didn't quite fit at the top of the show, but we still want to talk about them and give you some links to follow up on your own after the show. And some of these links came from our fantastic subreddit over at techsnap.reddit.com. And our first Roundup story this week has me shaking my head. Giving IT guys a bad name, the FBI, pretty clever actually, cuts access to a group of internet access to a group of hotels, and then shows up as the IT guys and offers to go in and fix it and installs monitoring hardware and software.
Yep.
Pretty clever.
Seems like the same thing could have been done by somebody who's not the FBI.
Exactly. That's what caught my attention about it. The FBI applied for warrants to the summer raid for 3 $25,000 per night villas. That's how much these cost to stay there. That's the kind of clients they were interested in. But, yeah. The authorities built in part a case for a search warrant by turning off internet access in the 3 villas. Wow.
Yeah.
There you go.
But it shows the power of having a clipboard.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Now, you found a really fascinating interview of one of the old developers. I don't know how old this video is, but...
so Gopher was this protocol for finding text files back, before HTTP was really a thing. So it was definitely interesting to have an interview with two of those developers.
And eventually, by about February of 91, yeah, that's about right, they decided, okay, make a campus-wide information system, but actually the committee had a cool idea, which was it should be a little bit distributed. It shouldn't be one centralized system. So they had one design, but it didn't look codable, at least when I said, Farhad, why don't you code this up?
I said, there's no way I can code that up.
That's pretty cool. That is great. Good find, Alan. Boy, yes. I remember Gopher. I didn't use it much, but I do remember it. I just thought this next story was just kind of interesting. But keeping my eye, you remember after all the Snowden leaks, Brazil made a huge stink that they were going to try to route around the U.S.
Specifically in the case of Brazil, oftentimes, to get to anywhere in Europe, they would then hop to the States and then up to New York and then to Europe or whatever. Mm-hmm. And, they're like, well, we'd like to be able to have private conversations with people in Europe.
Yeah, it looks like they're not bluffing. The country is about to stretch a cable from the northern city of, how do you say this one, Alan? Fortzela? All the way to Portugal, and they vowed not to use a single U.S. vendor. As the news goes down, to not include any American vendors, it looks like Brazil is very serious. They'll be investing $185 million on the cable project alone, and not a penny of that will go to any American companies.
Yep.
So they're moving forward.
It goes to show that the NSA's thing have negative effect on the U.S. economy.
Yeah, there are. Hackers...
Like, if you look at that diagram there, you can see that almost every one of the other cables happens to go up to the U.S.
Right, exactly. So what's this hoopla about hackers using Gmail drafts, Alan?
Yeah, so we've talked about this before where I think it was might have been that Canadian guy that was caught spying. But instead of sending an email that would leave a trace, the spy would log into a Hotmail account, write up an email, leave it in the drafts, and then the controller would log into the same account and look at the draft, read it, and delete it. And so no email was ever sent, so there was really nothing to subpoena or whatever. Mm-hmm. Well, it turns out there's now a botnet that's using Gmail drafts as a similar dead drop for command and control. So the bot master logs into the Gmail, leaves a draft with a command in it, and then the bots log in and pick up, read the email, follow the command. Mm-hmm. Now, the thing here is I think Google would catch on to that fairly quickly because if they see like 1,000 IP addresses log into the Gmail account, they should probably assume it's been compromised.
And they do watch for that.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know that one was good, very useful. But The Wired has a whole article on it, and I thought that was interesting.
Yeah,
and I didn't have time to go dig into it enough because we had so much other stuff going on the show today.
Yeah, it's a big one, though. But it's in the roundup if you would like to read up on it further. This next one's another video, and it's more of a historical nature. And this is I watched this, and it's so painful. I'll just play a minute of it. This is Bill Gates back during the Microsoft monopoly trials, where a lawyer kind of doesn't seem to understand what he's asking Bill Gates, and Bill Gates struggles, it seems, to give him a legitimate answer.
When did you first become concerned about the competitive threat that Java posed to Microsoft?
Isn't this awkward?
Well, Java as a computer language does not pose a competitive threat to Microsoft. There's some runtime work that various companies are doing with different APIs, including Sun, that represent platform competition. So you have to be careful how you talk about Java.
Do you talk about Java as a competitive threat to Microsoft, Mr. Gates?
There's a lot of documents and understanding inside Microsoft that Java, the language, which if you take the term Java on the face of it and in some context is what it refers to, that's not a competitive threat. In fact, we are the leading vendor of Java language development tools. Sometimes
So I'll let you go watch the rest. I love these old historical ones. In fact, if you find more of these, submit them to the Tech Talk Today subreddit because I feature them frequently in Tech Talk Today. Interview there,
yeah, when somebody doesn't know what they're asking, and then you're trying to answer them, but it's like
we ship Java
the API. Yeah, it's like we ship Java, and Java's not the competition, but other people building stuff on top of Java that would then compete with ActiveX. That is kind of competition,
right?
But that really isn't Java's fault so much as some company making some other thing, and yeah. If we thought Java was a competition, we wouldn't bundle it with Windows and then.
Right. Back in the day, the Microsoft JVM was huge.
Yep.
All right, Alan, you got a PSA from the roundup here, don't we?
Yeah. So this one's says that don't run the GNU strings utility on untrusted files, which is a strange thing to say considering that's usually the first thing most security researchers do. So for those that don't know, the strings command is specifically for analyzing binary files, and it finds strings of printable letters. So if you run it, by default, it looks for any case where there's like 4 or more regular Latin letters in a row, or you can modify it and say, show me everything that is in this file that's at least, 8 letters in a row and with no binary in it.
Right.
And so if you run that on binary, you'll usually find all the text messages that are in that binary, and it makes it easier to figure out what's going on. And, you can also find other stuff. But it turns out that because strings is actually using binutils, it can one of its bundled libraries can actually try to analyze certain types of binary files. And so a specially crafted file could actually exploit a vulnerability in that library, and then you're off to the races, so that a security researcher can be sent a sample, and when they try to analyze it, it might exploit their machine.
Hilarious. That's a pretty good PSA, on.
I do wonder if the utility on FreeBSD has the same problem, or if it's only the GNU one. But they have an example file here, and if you run it, it will cause the strings command to segfault. Which, that's quite funny.
Yeah, that is. All right, this next one comes from, it looks like a French site that Alan's ran through a Google Translator for us. Yeah. A SQL injection on a car? What is this saying exactly? Road attack.
Just to follow up, the strings command on FreeBSD doesn't crash.
Oh, okay.
But anyway.
There you go.
Yes. So this guy basically got some cardboard and put an SQL statement on the front of his car, and apparently when the OCR software on the speed cameras snaps it and reads it and runs it, it runs an insert on its SQL database saying, hey, I just saw a car with this license plate, do this. And apparently that happens.
No way. You're telling me...
I'm not... because the French translation is a little bad, I can't quite tell if, it's just we saw somebody trying this, or if something actually happened with it per se.
I like that he has the drop database sick.
Now, it almost seems like he would have to know what the name of the database is.
Yeah.
And so the fact that he has something there, maybe.
Yeah.
It seems like in addition to preventing SQL injection, you would have at least put a sanity check saying, hey, if somebody's license plate is more than this many letters, we probably scanned something that wasn't a license plate and they're just confused.
You would think so.
Right? Like in the States, you're 7 characters? I think that's what it is in Canada. If it's more than 8 characters, just throw it away. It seems like it would be a pretty simple thing. Although then somebody could just add a bunch of letters to their license plate or something and maybe get through the speed camera, but still.
All right, our next roundup item is another video. This is the video-heavy roundup. What's this one, Alan?
So this is from Paul Vixie, who's you remember we showed a live stream of him testifying before Congress about security stuff. Basically, he's giving a short version of his talk from Black Hat about abusing CPE devices and the recommended fixes for it. For people that don't know, CPE device stands for Consumer Presence Equipment. It's an old telco term for basically your router. Back when people had, fancy T1 lines or something, they would often have a device provided by the phone company that did their end of the connection, or that you would have to provide, and usually be like a Cisco router or whatever. Now, with people having DSL modems and stuff, it's the modem usually, and they're, they become a big security threat. And he's got a video where he talks and goes through his slides. So I thought that was interesting for people.
All right, Alan, be very afraid. Hackers have breached the White House computer system.
The unclassified network.
Yeah.
Although at one point they say the presidential mansion part of it, and I don't know if they just referring to the whole White House or,
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, there was some intrusion on some part of the network, and for a day or so, a bunch of people's computers were unplugged from the network or whatever.
There you go. That is...
But, it's the unclassified network. It's not supposed to have any sensitive information on it.
Right.
It's, this is the one where people run Windows and visit websites. So
hopefully. I've heard the analogy that if you go to a restaurant and the bathroom's a mess, there's a good chance the kitchen's also a mess. But
well, yes. Well, this one, it doesn't seem like... It's not like somebody downloaded some malware and got it. It seems that, well, obviously they're saying it was the Russians, but we don't know that for sure.
I love this next roundup story because it's just a PNG. And it's like a Twitter uptime report in the browser or something. What am I seeing here? With a load average?
Basically, Twitter introduced this new thing called cards, specifically for companies that want to advertise and stuff. It lets you put like a really big picture in a tweet or something like that.
Yeah.
Or basically have a tweet that you can link to and it has all the information. Well, in the obviously blacked out part of the URL, he's stuck in the uptime command followed by %00, which is the null byte, which terminates the string. And basically in the blacked out part of the command is the magic.
Yeah.
But he caused Twitter servers to run the uptime command.
And then spit the output back to him, too.
Yeah. So he can run commands on the Twitter server with this until Twitter fixes it.
Apparently, Twitter's servers had been up for 46 days at the time of this test.
Oh, that particular server that he had. Yes. Yeah, I'm sure they have very many of them and they're isolated and they don't have access to much.
His tweet simply is, "Go home, Twitter, you're drunk. I'll accept my bug bounty via Bitcoin, thanks."
Yeah.
Clever. Good for you, sir. Good for
Although, if you actually want a bug bounty, you probably have to go through the regular channels.
Yeah. Speaking of Bitcoin, we have a Bitcoin roundup story, don't we?
Yes. So, there were quite a few heists that happened with Bitcoin, especially off exchanges and stuff. But in particular, there was one cryptorush.in and the Bitcom security guys think they've actually tracked down who the thief was, and they have a whole report on their investigation and how and their techniques and how they followed the Bitcoins.
How they tracked this guy down. There's a picture. They even have a picture of him. They really found him.
So, that might be something people are interested in.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll save that for my weekend reading. And then one of the more popular submissions to our subreddit this week, it's a comic strip that talks about keeping your systems secure. And how do we describe this one for the audio listeners, Alan?
Right. So it's a picture and it's security checklist and it has a list of things. So first, anti-SQL injection protection. And it's like a check mark. SSL and OpenSSL up to date, check mark. I think they meant SSH, not SSL. Like SSL and OpenSSL, you wouldn't have. No. Anyway. Passwords hashed with salt, check. Multi-factor authentication on the back office, check. And AES encryption of sensitive data, check. And then it's got preventing the product manager from sending the whole unencrypted database via email.
Check.
X. No, it's an X instead of a check. So, they have all the standard security stuff, but because somebody that had access to the database just emailed the whole thing off to somebody, security's exposed.
Yep. Isn't that true? You can go to all those.
The IT department did all the right things, and then, some executive level guy that doesn't know what he's doing, and there's the whole thing.
Now, this next roundup item is a pretty epic-looking computer hardware poster. This is like the ultimate computer hardware chart
It's
here.
a little old, but that's actually, I've come to think about it a little bit. Chris, if you look at the bottom, there's a link to a higher res one to show on the stream, and then if you click it again, it zooms in.
Yeah, I'm looking at it on DeviantArt here.
Right. So, especially nowadays, there are probably a lot of people watching TechSNAP that are younger that haven't seen some of these ports.
Oh, you're
right. And so this might make it easier for them to actually identify some of the stuff.
They might not even know what a parallel port or a SCSI port looks like.
Yes, like especially the SCSI ports for the computer side. Most people might not even know that back in like the Pentium 1 days and Pentium 2s, there were actually CPUs that connected to a card slot instead of going into a socket.
Right.
Remember those slot CPUs? I think I had one of my Celerons was one.
Yeah. Yes, I do.
But and it shows the old like AT style keyboards that were the big round connector and the pins were splayed out instead of like the regular ones.
Apple had some funky display connectors for a while too. Look at some of these. Really weird.
The AAUI, the ones you see those on like old Cisco routers. Mm-hmm. And then they got some newer stuff like mini DisplayPort, mini DVI.
Yeah.
And even a mini VGA. I didn't know there was such a thing.
And they have the CPU sockets, which is handy.
Although they're missing the current generation of Intel CPU sockets.
Yeah. And here's the different Molex connectors and power connector types.
Yep. If anybody remember those, a lot of people probably have never seen the 4-pin floppy connector, unless maybe they have a card reader or something.
I think
or
a lot of
especially the old AT style motherboard connectors.
I was going to say, a
Those
lot of
white
people
ones.
haven't seen ISA slots.
That too.
Yeah.
Or even some of those other the slots they showed near the top that are actually pins,
Yeah.
like the LC processor direct slot.
Oh,
and the
new
new
bus. Yeah.
I'd never heard of that before.
New bus is what was in all of the old Macs. Yeah.
Because it's funny, on FreeBSD there's a thing called new bus, but spelled differently, and
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
the system. But yeah, it shows all the different connectors and stuff, and I thought it might be handy for people that are seeing old hardware for the first time.
Yeah.
Because I'm guessing there's probably even a generation of people watching TechSNAP that never had AGP video cards.
Wow, that makes me feel really old. But
Yeah,
you're
I know,
probably
eh?
right. I hope you're not right,
Yeah.
kind of,
Well,
sort of.
there's a bunch of people that are still in high school watching the show, right? So they probably definitely have never seen an AGP card,
Yeah. And we'll have a link to that.
let alone ISA.
Now, when are we going to see new stuff? It's still in the works. It's still in progress. Version 2. It's being worked on right now.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. But we don't know when we're going to see
date
it.
on the post, so I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. It has all the old stuff plus new stuff. That's pretty neat. Pretty cool. Links to that. In fact, links to everything we've talked about are in today's show notes. You go to jupiterbroadcasting.com, find episode 186, and then you scroll down past the download links, and boom, all of the show notes and resources and all of that are right there. Plus, you can grab an RSS feed and subscribe to the show and get it weekly. Alan, is there anything else we wanted to cover in the show today?
No.
Okay. Well, then I'll pass along a little pro tip for the audience. Join us live, won't you, over at jblive.tv, 1 p.m. on a Thursday, which is changing, actually.
Yeah. So I don't even know.
Yeah. You know what? I hate this part
Use
of the
the
year.
Google Calendar.
Yeah. Really.
Because-
jupiterbroadcasting.com/calendar. This is because we have a lot of people that have been missing the live show this week.
I guess we can describe what's happening is a couple of years ago, George W. Bush, decided that the U.S. and Canada got dragged along, that they would move their daylight savings time to start 2 weeks earlier and end 2 weeks later.
Yes.
So currently, we haven't switched yet, but the rest of the world has.
Yeah.
And so for the next week and a bit, everything's going to be all screwy.
Sorry about that. Hashtag blame
So,
Bush.
yeah. So they've fallen back an hour and we haven't.
Yep. You could be like a SM in the chat room, and you can add our Google Calendar right to your calendar as an overlay, and you can just turn it on and off. And he says that makes it so much easier. So go to jupiterbroadcasting.com/calendar. And then when you join us live, not only do you get the stuff that happens between the show segments where we take a few minutes off and just hang out, but you also get to help name the show. And then we vote on that. And it is an ultimate no man left standing competition. Not really. But
Just murder everybody.
yeah. Okay, something like that. Something like that. And then last but not least, don't forget we want your emails, techsnap@jupiterbroadcasting.com. All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much for tuning this week's episode of TechSNAP. We'll see you right back here next week.